So our panelists who are going to be speaking on ranked choice voting. First is Dr. Chow Wu, recently elected Maryland State Delegate of District 9, serving on the House Ways and Means Committee, Montgomery County Land Use Transportation and Public Safety Committee, House or AAPI Caucus, House, and Maryland Transit Caucus. So 2 months ago, he and Delegate Jen Terrassa proposed ranked choice voting for the Board of Education, and there was an article written about it. Next panelist is Mr. Ryan Kirby. He's the Public Policy Specialist of Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center. His job is to support the policy director administers the organization's internship program. For that, he served as the Chief of Staff for State Senator Cheryl Kagan in the Maryland Senate, where he supported the Senator's election legislation. And finally, Justin Gallardo. He is a Baltimore resident, currently working as a substitute teacher in the Baltimore County Public School. He was a former member of Represent Maryland, where they worked to push for ranked choice voting in Baltimore, and along with other issues like legislative special elections. So our panelists, thank you for your time to speak. All right, so first I'll ask is, could you explain, for any of you, to explain what ranked choice voting is?
Thank you, Kiana. And thank you, Hiru, for the introduction. So my name is Chow. I'm a delegate for House of Delegate and District 9A, which includes Western Howard County and Northwestern of Montgomery County. So as you talked about earlier, we introduced a local bill, to only apply to Howard County Board of Education election for ranked choice voting. So the ranked choice voting is really, like in the past when we vote, in general, it's a binary vote. You vote somebody yes or no, right? You either vote them or not voting them. With the ranked choice voting, you can vote with a list of candidates with a weight from 1 to n, right? Depending on how many candidates and how many positions. In this way, you're not make a binary choice. You're make a choice with intention. That's the huge difference between the current like yes or no vote or ranked choice voting. And the way to count the ballot will be different as well. So for the current voting system we are having now, basically you just count how many votes. But with the ranked choice voting, there's a process to eliminate votes first, gradually, until someone gets 51% of vote. So to declare the winner. That's the major difference there.
All right, anyone else want to add on?
Yeah, I'll just chime in. So I'll also just talk a little bit about what the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center is. We're a national nonpartisan nonprofit that we work with election administrators to implement ranked choice voting and go over some of the technical details, the behind the scenes stuff as to how your elections work. And so we don't deal with any of the advocacy for ranked choice voting. That tends to fall in organizations like Represent Maryland and Fair Vote and those kinds of places. But with ranked choice voting, one of the things that the delegate touched on that makes it different from first past the post or plurality is that it really helps avoid strategic voting. And it really helps to encourage voters to vote their true conscience, the candidates that they truly support, and it incentivizes coalition building with candidates because they want to earn not just the first choice, but the second choice or third choice for a voter. So I'll just add that a little bit.
Right.
I'll touch on some more what Ryan was saying about the first past the post, but you probably have heard the more negative dark side of voting, which is either you're going to throw away your vote or, the lesser two evils kind of argument. But with ranked choice voting is you really get your choice. You really do get choices. You can use all of them. You can choose not to use all of them, but that'd be kind of silly because you have a whole ballot with you. but that's clearly been it's been definitely more positive campaigning. I know one of them was a congressional special election in Alaska, and they like Mary I hope I say her last name correctly, Peltola, over something like Sarah Palin, who people just didn't like, and they didn't want to deal with fringe candidates or other nutty candidates, that they'd rather have somebody maybe who's more realistic, logical, and diplomatic. So that's probably the more positive aspect of ranked choice voting, is to have a much more healthier discussion and definitely more positive campaigning.
All right. Oh, so looks like you guys answered the second question. So moving on to the next one is, so having said that, what are the challenges to implementing ranked choice voting, such as in Maryland? I've heard that there are 2 places in Maryland that have it implemented, which is Tacoma Park and I can't remember the other one currently. Tacoma.
So there are basically no large institution applied for ranked choice voting yet. So, but a lot of counties are promoting that. For example, this year, Montgomery County actually, the ranked choice voting applied to many elections, and the bill passed their local delegation. Unfortunately, didn't go to floor for vote, right? So there's some other places we're working on that. I think the challenge we're facing now for Maryland is people feel ranked choice voting is complicated, and then both in terms of voting and in terms of counting. So it's something really new for many people. So I think it probably takes some time to educate people, make sure they understand the advantage and the disadvantage of ranked choice voting, and eventually our legislature will have many more legislature will have a better understanding how ranked choice voting will work, what the advantage of that, and what may possible disadvantage, and make a informed decision, and start with some jurisdictions. And for example, with the school board, I think a lot of people really think school board will be a good place to start with ranked choice voting. And I think last week I went to CDC, Columbia Democratic Club, right? They spend an hour talk about ranked choice voting as well. So you see a lot of people pick up this topic, and really interesting indeed. Because both Justin and Ryan said, we believe ranked choice voting can reduce the negative campaign, because candidate, you're not just voting like competing for the first choice, you may competing for the second and first choices, right? Third choice. So in order to that, you really want to be a person can work with others, not just start a negative campaign all the way. And that's one of the advantages I really like. I think the school board has been more divisive than before. We hope this ranked choice voting can bring back that normality there.
All right.
Oh, I'll just add from a potential barrier that we tend to see. There's 2 fronts. You have the voting equipment and the actual equipment itself. There are a lot of places across the country that use what we call legacy equipment, which is about 2 decades old, and needs to be replaced no matter what they're running, just because it's so old. But actually in Maryland, they have modern voting equipment that is RCV capable. And it's kind of like a flip of a switch in a sense, in that ES&S just has to upload the software, which they call Express Runoff, or use outside tabulation equipment like RC-Tab, which is actually what our organization provides. It's free open source software that handles tabulation, but it works with a number of the different vendors. So Maryland's actually well suited to adapt to ranked choice voting from a technical side. They have the modern voting equipment in all 24 counties. So from that perspective, Maryland's ahead of the game compared to a lot of other places.
Sorry, it was not letting me speak for some reason. Or at least I had trouble hitting the button. Maybe I'll add on to what Ryan was saying, which is we get a lot of politician talk and a lot of people who honestly don't want to enable certain things because it does take away kind of their power or spotlight. So I did legislative special elections or advocated for that. And we heard a lot of, we can't afford this, it's just too much money, except I had to explain to 8th grade, 6th to 8th. Now, eighth graders today, actually all my grade levels, about why we're getting out earlier. And I explained one of those things is it's not called snow day, it's called an emergency day and applies to various things. One of them I used was like, it was congressional special elections. And we had that with Elijah Cummings a few years ago for his seat. And I was explaining in that is I was like, it's mandated by federal law. We have to do it. We have the equipment for it. We simply just have to take it out of, well, for Baltimore County, take it out of the warehouse on Gilroy Road, shut the school system down for one day, and, you know, hold the election. So a lot of this is already paid for. It's just a matter of having to do it. In regards to ranked choice voting, again, we're probably capable software-wise, but I don't think people understand the legislative process. And a lot of nonprofits will kind of jump in and say, oh, you know, you can just petition the city of Baltimore or Baltimore County to have ranked choice voting. No, you can't do that. You have to go to the state first because the Board of Election is both an agency of the state and the county. In fact, the state has to pass a budget before the counties pass their budget, and the state legislator cannot adjourn without the budget. So it would be kind of hard to fund the other counties without a budget.
Ooh. All right, so Justin, you just was touching on that. You were discussing the whole legislative process of getting this in, because my next one is what can Maryland residents do to bring ranked choice voting to like Howard County and the rest of the state? Good.
I guess I should answer that now. So Howard County, they have a ratified charter. I know a lot of people will colloquially say home rule, but it's actually called a ratified charter. And because this was an agency of the state, I'm sorry, because they can do certain things for their county council once it's cleared through the state legislature. But again, I think one thing that residents of, say, Howard County would have to do is make sure that their delegates and the state senators and their delegation is on board with something like this. And that kind of starts like right now, because the legislative session, once that starts, you know, you just, you have to be, I think Delegate Lehman was saying for a lot of her bills, it's kind of like you're on the spotlight now. And if you really BS it, in committee, good luck, you know, getting that through the rest of the session. You know, it does take a lot of lobbying, a lot of movers and shakers, and you better know who they are.
Sorry. All right. So next would be this is specifically to Chow, and then after this question, after this one, we can open up to questions from the audience. Do you give us some details about the legislations that you and Jen introduced? The bill for ranked choice voting, how was it received? And how would you envision it working?
Sure. So because it's a local bill, right? So it's really our local delegates and the senator vote first, right? Unless the bill comes out of local jurisdiction, it actually not go to our standing committee to discuss at all, right? So the bill died in our local committee, and both the Senate side, we have 3 senators, and we have 8 delegates, right? It didn't come out either delegate side or Senate side, so it's died in the local jurisdiction. So I think the concern for many delegates and senators is really, this is unprecedented. Nobody tried that before, right? So I said, if everybody, I think we just voted and voted down, right? So I think the concern for them, as I said earlier, they may feel it's too new and complicated, and just they don't like it, right? I think we just need to keep advocating on this and make sure, and at least our local legislators understand what RCV is and how it works and what the advantage of that. Where can we start trying this? And that's my continuous effort to push for this change. I do believe the benefit for RCV outweigh the negative side of the concern. For example, it may cost more money. Actually, very tiny bit of money, and our machine can handle that as well. And we have the state board of election come to our committee talk about ranked choice voting because another ranked choice voting bill from Montgomery County, plus their local delegation, it actually went to my Ways and Means Committee. We had a long discussion on that. So the state board of elections said they are able to handle RCV, and they have the machine, they have the software. I think we can do it. It's really the political will, whether we have it or not, right? And whether when we say unprecedented, there always be something new, right? And start from somewhere. I think that's where we can see what will be our breakthrough and which election we want to apply for.
Right. If no one else wants to add on, we can open up to questions. Anyone, any questions?
I just want to quickly add on to Kiana for what the delegate was saying. There's also a lot of political will. I know a lot of people in Baltimore City think this is some progressive utopia, but no, it's definitely not. It's still a very slow, very, I wouldn't even say pragmatic. It's still a very elitist kind of city. And people like Delegate Cheryl Gwynn, who was the chair of the Baltimore City delegation, was not supportive of a lot of things. You know, it was very lucky to get anything for her.
All right. So that's it for questions. Francis, I see your hand up.
Yeah, hi. This is a topic that I've spent a lot of time looking at. The first thing, I think Justin touched on this, but the single biggest obstacle to getting different voting methods passed in Maryland is not technical or financial or you know, supporters. It is the Speaker of the House. The current one and the past one do not want to change the voting system, and they have authority to block any election-related bill that they want, or more specifically, don't want. And that's what's happened to Montgomery County's bill the past few times it's been introduced. It just doesn't even get a hearing, goes in the trash can. So the first thing that needs to be done is to figure out how to get her on board, because I don't think we have the power to replace her. So someone in Baltimore County is going to need to convince her that that this is a good idea before anything happens. Now, my question, unfortunately, needs a small preamble. If we go back to last year, Alaska, which uses ranked choice voting, had a special election. There were three major candidates in it: a moderate Democrat, a sort of standard establishment Republican, and Sarah Palin, a MAGA Trumper type. The election, in that election, Alaska is it's much more Republican than it is Democrat. It's more independent even, but on the right-left scale, Republicans win almost every time at the state level. However, because there were two factions of Republicans in the election, the vote was split, and the Democrat won. She would have won under the ordinary voting system, plurality. She also won under RCV, even though when you looked at the votes, a clear majority of the population would have preferred the middle Republican. Okay, now the problem with that is that it's good that the Democrat got in. However, the problem is Maryland is a majority Democratic state. It has some progressive Democrats. It also has some moderate Democrats who are, as we know, willing to vote for a Republican. If we had ranked choice voting in Maryland, the same situation could happen in reverse. We'd have a progressive Democrat, a moderate Democrat, and a moderate Republican. And the Democratic vote would be split and the Republican would win. The exact reverse of what happened in Alaska. So even though a majority of the population, clear majority, would have preferred a Democrat to win. So my question is, what do we do about that?
Francis, I think that's a great question. Yeah, and it really depends on the distribution of voters, right? Both the distribution of voters and then combine the ranked choice voting. There's a possibility like maybe a moderate Republican can win in some counties, right? So I think in majority of counties, and it will not. And then think about the other one. So the bill I proposed from school board, which is a non-partisan election, right? So it's really not involved in parties. And we really, for me, I really want it to be like school board election to be non-political. I think there are a lot of stuff political already. We really want to downplay that side, make people at least, I would say, we have more people in the middle than what we think. And the problem sometimes they have no way to really have their voice heard because the way we set it up. I believe by ranked choice voting, that actually motivates like a lot of people in the middle, a lot of independent come out to vote. Then they realize the vote counts, right? Because it's not just a party, but in terms of the way the position of the candidates and how they behave themselves and what's the position relative to other candidates. Because it's not a winner take all anymore, right? By ranked choice voting, that will help to really make elections not as divisive as they were going to.
Yeah, I think one thing I'll add, and Deli, you made a really good point about how candidates run their races. Alaska was a particularly unique scenario because there were candidates that ran like it was still a plurality election and specifically told their voters not to rank anybody second. So that created an interesting scenario for those voters where if they didn't rank anybody and their candidate got eliminated, their vote was exhausted. So it doesn't count anymore in the final round of counting. And Alaska has a unique independent streak in how they vote for some of their elected officials. And Sarah Palin has some interesting favorability ratings within Alaska if you take a look at that. So it put the Republican Party in a bit of an interesting spot as to how they were choosing to run their race. So that's a little bit harder to make a direct comparison. And I'll just point out that, even, Republicans in Maryland can still win under a plurality election that, they just had Governor Hogan for 2 years. So it might not necessarily be the election system that is the factor for that. It tends to, how the candidates run their race and that as well.
I wanted to add on that, so be it. I will say, even where I live, in the northeast side of Baltimore County, it's voted for some very conservative Democrats. It's voted for some very moderate Republicans. But at the very last minute, they ran, I know for legislative aid, a slate of Republicans who were all absolutely horrible, fringy, but people just ignored that and they just drowned out, and no one really cared. But the real people who did win, like my councilman Wade Koch or David Marks, it's just because they have strong connections and they generally keep it about the constituency. Oh, and they do come to community meetings. They're very active on social media in a genuine way and not a nonsensical way. I know even nationally, like the state of Maine that does use ranked choice voting, they voted for Jared Golden by a very big margin and then flipped the opposite for Trump. But what they said is that they liked their congressman and they liked that he focused on the issues. And I think nationally, people could even learn about the poorest of residents, like the 2020 election on the border counties of Texas or Miami-Dade County, Florida, Orange County, California, is they were like, you need to come to our community, you need to talk about it, and maybe we'll vote for you, It's all about the engagement.
All right. Any other questions people have?
I have a question. This is Drew. I couldn't figure out how to raise my hand. All right, let me see if I can explain this. One And I don't, and this is a legit question. I can't figure this out on how ranked choice voting would affect this scenario. But one of the things that I've observed in many elections is you have special interests, like say major developers, will contribute to multiple candidates so that no matter who wins, they have the influence they paid for. Now, how would ranked choice voting affect that dynamic? Would it be that perhaps, it makes a space for candidates who turn down, say, the developer contribution so they can't contribute to everybody, or what? I'd like to hear the panelists' thoughts on that.
I think that's a challenging question. I have no idea how to go either way, right? So because this is kind of a totally different, I would say, quite a different issue, right? So ranked choice voting is not to try to address the developer influence, right? So because developers have so much money, they can spread it out, right? Anyway, I think it's really try to bring up the candidate who in the middle and can win both independent Democrat Republicans, right? And or even from the Democratic Party side, those candidates seems, I think, more kind of just in the middle, and they can attract both a lot of like maybe number one choice and number two choices, right? And try to win. And so I frankly, I don't know how that can change the developer influence at this moment. But if our other panelists have any ideas, I would love to hear.
Yeah, I haven't seen a lot of research done into how ranked choice voting affects campaign contributions or anything like that. I mean, I could see hypothetically that, if a developer or anybody who wants to make contributions to all of the campaigns in a plurality election, they could still make all, donations to all of the campaigns in a ranked choice voting election. But I don't think that would have any impact on the actual election itself. It would come down to, the issues of the campaigns there. So I don't think there's a lot of research that's been done to answer that kind of question.
I wouldn't even know how to answer that question. I would say that there are plenty of organizations that spend all kinds of money, but does it ever influence people? Probably not. I know there are a lot of loudmouth organizations like the National Rifle Association, but they're absolutely horrible on spending, and generally people nowadays just kind of look at them as a joke of an organization. So it's about the engagement with the voters and even the candor of the campaigns themselves to talk about relevant issues.
Right. Any other questions for the panelists?
Yeah, I've got a question, and perhaps this was answered earlier. I came on a little bit late, so I'm sorry about that. But my question is, so I'm not 100% familiar on the background, but I assume that some form of ranked choice voting bill has probably been introduced in the state of Maryland for the past couple of years and has unfortunately not passed. And so my question is, like, what are like the reasons from opponents to ranked choice voting, specifically in Maryland? Like, what have their reasons been for not supporting the bill or not having the bill pass? Oh, looks like Francis has something to say on it too.
Yeah, I worked with Julie Plakovich-Carr and a couple of the other delegates to try and get their bills through in previous years. There is a single voice, well, possibly two, if you include the president of the Senate, who opposes ranked choice. The reason the speaker opposes ranked choice is that the current voting system works for her. It works for her party. She gets the candidates elected that she wants, and making a change could disrupt that.
I think they said it very perfectly. If you're with the upper echelon and you have the power, you have the money, do you really want to give it up? Probably not, especially if you're still in your prime. And I can understand if maybe they were like trying to pass a torch and they were like in their 70s or 80s, but they're not. And then they also had to care about everyone else who's supported their campaign and wanting to make sure that they're able to have their career successes.
All right.
I will not comment on this because I don't have the insight, right? But I think it's really new. That's the question, right? I think really we don't see it. We don't see how it works for a lot of people. It's really new. I think that's maybe one reason, one major reason. It's a change, right? For changes, you never know it's good or bad, right? And so that I think that's what one of the primary reason. I don't see there's a lot of opposition. For example, during our hearings, right, we barely hear a lot of like many oppositions at all. Usually people just have questions, right? There are no strong oppositions at all. That's what I like during the committee hearing for the Montgomery County, their ranked choice voting bill. It's an enabling bill, right? So that means enabling means our state legislation pass a bill, which either apply to some local jurisdiction or whole state. And then you can decide whether you want to really choose that election system or not, right? So the enabling one is really have a choice for local jurisdictions, right? Then they can decide whether they want to go or not. I think it's new, right? I think that's a major concern for a lot of people. Nobody knows what's the consequence. Or I think Francis mentioned earlier, right? That may benefit like unintended consequence, right? And then make some people hesitate to move forward with the new elections system.
All right. Yuri, do you have something to say?
Yeah, Francis, do you want to go first? You had your hands up before me.
No, you go first. You haven't spoken yet.
Okay. I have a couple of questions. One is to Delegate Wu. So is the legislation that you introduced with Delegate Terrasa, that would be applicable to all counties, or if the counties who require enabling legislation would benefit them basically? Would that be accurate?
It's a local enabling bill, right? So we enable Howard County Council to use ranked choice voting, right? They can say they ignore it, right? It's the enabling bill. It's not really just you need to do it, right? So they can do some research that, okay, that actually is good, right? They enable that. So I think that it's hard to tell, right? So each county is different, right? So for me, because I don't want to do a large scale change in terms of the whole state, right? I want to see whether that actually provide that benefit to local school board election, right?
To answer that,
But I will continue to push for that. I think I will go and continue to talk with other delegates and the senators. And I actually created some posters and some YouTube videos for that as well that try to explain that.
To answer that in a more common layman term is, I know for like Montgomery County when it was introduced, it wasn't ranked choice voting specifically. It said alternative voting methods, because this enabling legislation is very ambiguous, open-ended. It just gives permission, and then they could decide when to rank choice voting or other forms of it.
You're right, Justin. Yeah, you're right. It's an enabling bill. They actually provided at least two choices for Montgomery County in that bill.
Okay. And then a follow-up is because it was mentioned in terms of the fact that this might be there's not a lot of public information, or like it's not a well understood way of voting. How many? Somebody may have already mentioned this, but how many jurisdictions? So it was mentioned that Maine does ranked choice voting as a state, but is in terms of local jurisdictions, are there what has been the progress?
Yeah, so I can answer that. There's 63 jurisdictions across the country that have ranked choice voting. The vast majority of them are municipalities, and then counties, there's about half a dozen or so, and then Alaska and Maine are the two statewide uses. And then there were 5 states that used it in the Democratic primary in 2020. And then there are 6 states that use it for UOCAVA voters, and it's mostly southern states. UOCAVA voters are the overseas and military voters. Since they have typically a very short time frame for their runoff elections, they send them what is a ranked ballot, and then if they have a runoff election, then they can still have their vote counted, since getting a ballot from across the globe takes a lot of time.
Okay, very good. And I think my last question might take a little bit more time, so I'll let Francis go.
Okay, question, I'm wondering if any of the panelists have considered other voting methods other than RCV. I'm not going to get into the technical details about the non-monotonicity and the non-summability and the non-Condorcet, et cetera. But for example, there are other ranked voting methods that would use the exact same ballot that would avoid the kind of flaws that RCV has. One of them operates almost identically to ranked choice, except that it does head-to-head comparisons and ends up with the Condorcet winner. And have any of the panelists, I don't know, if any of the panelists have thought about other voting methods, are you wedded to RCV specifically?
I'll just say mine because it's probably the clearest. Working for the Ranked Choice Voting Resource Center, we don't critique other alternative voting methods. We're aware of them, but there's a reason it's in our name.
Ryan, you're a great answer. I look at some other method, right? So I think I just focus on ranked choice voting because I think you always find like good side, bad side, like bad side for many different voting methods, right? So for me, I will choose ranked choice voting. So I think it's almost very difficult already to just try to promote ranked choice voting. I really don't want to confuse many more people, get even more confused. And then, but I really did some research on many other like voting methods as well. I think ranked choice voting is the best one among many others. So that's one reason I said like just focus on this one, see how people react, because there people always have other like, choices as well, right? So.
All right. Any other? Harry, your hand's up. Did you have something else to say, or?
Yeah, I just had one question. So I hear what Francis is saying in terms of are there other alternatives, which is fine. For me, I'm open to any alternative that breaks the stranglehold of the two-party system, and quite frankly, if in Maryland it's really just one party, and it's the establishment, and it's 2023, and a party that's been dominated by a supermajority Democrat is still considering changing the counties, the state's constitution to codify women's rights, right? Like this is in Maryland, so it's just it's not serious. Like they're just not. It's a system that's not benefiting, the people. So I'm all for it. So at least from my perspective, what can so my question is, what can we as individuals and as groups do between now and next year to help bring more awareness and move this forward?
So if you ask for my opinion, I would say talk to your delegates, senators, right, and see. For example, the bill I proposed, at least we need to get out of our local jurisdiction, right? Otherwise, you will not come to our committee. I think another issue I've been thinking about is really open primary, right? So probably, I know, so just can be very controversial, right? And at the same time, there's a reason we have parties, right? Why we're open up the primary? I think because in many, I would say, counties, there are a lot of independent voters, right? They're not able to vote in the primary. How can we get them involved? I think that's the topic I really think is worthy of discussion. How we can get the people involved. I think for me, the concern for election is really we don't have enough people to vote, right? The voting rate is low. And how can we get people interested and really come out to vote? That will help us to create more debate and get a more better policy for the state of Maryland.
So I'll just say, while the Resource Center itself doesn't do any advocacy, there are a lot of resources on our website that if you share them with your legislator or other people who are interested in just learning more about it, we actually just released our first set of RCV 101 videos. So they're short videos that are less than 2 minutes that also provide some animation and so that provides another avenue rather than just a verbal description of it. So that's another avenue, just sharing some of those resources as well.
Also, you want to make sure if there are any kind of enabling legislation, your delegation, the whole delegation better be on board, because it's going to look rather weird, if members are saying, no, we're not supportive of this. And also maybe the county council can be on board passing resolutions. And make sure you know if your county has a ratified charter, because there are a lot of counties in Maryland that are very primitive and live centuries behind that still have boards of commissioners. And all that they can do is really just represent the county as a collective and say they support this, this, and this, but all their budgets have to be passed by the legislature, and they basically really don't have any say after that. So you just have to know the ins and outs.
All right. Yeah.
Here, I have another quick question. Could we do ranked choice voting for party primaries?
You can, right? You can, as long as you have more than 2 candidates, right? If there are only 2 candidates, it doesn't matter. So if you have more than 2 candidates, and then that you can apply for it. Yeah, it's really just, but at the same time, the parties have their own rules to govern themselves, right? So you, like as the state legislature in general, you don't want to take that power off from that party. So I think it's really advocacy from grassroots, right? Change the way how we operate in our parties to really reflect the change for the majority, like party members want.
Yeah, and I'll just give one example that the Republican Party of Virginia, actually, that's how they got, they handled their state nominations for 2021, how Glenn Youngkin was nominated. They used RCV internally. So.
All right. If no one else wants to speak, this could be it. No other discussion. Third part question in the chat. All right, actually, what's this? I don't see a third part question.